People like you don't need to get on this flight." The words landed just in front of the scanner. Before Ava Bennett could even pull the strap of her bag back onto her shoulder, in her hand were her passport and a first-class boarding pass. Behind her was a line of waiting people. A departures board, with the minutes still ticking down. And 2 phones that had been raised from the middle of the crowd. No one at gate B12 knew why a single short sentence had brought the entire check-in counter to a standstill. At 7:23 in the morning, gate B12 of the domestic terminal had opened its priority lane for Flight 447. The electronic display above the counter showed 38 minutes until boarding. The overhead camera panned slowly across the queuing area. A metal trash can was placed right next to the counter. To the left was a narrow path for maintenance carts. The counter was clean. The scanner was lit. And the document verification screen was ready. Ava Bennett stood alone at the front of the lane. She wore a short, dark-colored coat, dress pants, and low heels, with a dark brown crossbody bag. Its strap frayed at the edges. Her work phone was in the outer pocket. Her document wallet was deeper inside. Not yet taken out. She held only her passport and boarding pass, both placed neatly on the counter when it was her turn. Behind the counter was Chloe Parker, her name tag pinned to her left breast, a scanner directly in front of her right hand. But Chloe Parker didn't look at the screen first. She looked from the toes of Ava Bennett's shoes up to the hem of her coat, at the old crossbody bag, and only then at her face. Then Chloe Parker pulled a tissue from a small box under the counter and used its corner to pinch the passport's cover, as if avoiding direct contact. The passport still hadn't gone through the scanner. "Give it here." Ava Bennett had already handed over her documents. The distance between them was less than an arm's length. The boarding pass was still lying flat on the counter. The line behind her had grown by a few more people. A blonde teenager, standing near the signpost, already had his camera open. A man in a suit also raised his phone from the adjacent line. "People like you don't need to get on this flight." Ava Bennett stood still, her hands lowered. "I have a ticket and my documents." Chloe Parker didn't return the passport. She swiped the side of her wrist across the counter, knocking the boarding pass off the edge. The paper spun half a turn before hitting the tiled floor, stopping near the toe of Ava Bennett's shoe with a grey smudge across one corner. She bent down to pick it up. While she was still bent over, Chloe Parker turned to the lane on the right and said, "Give her some space. Don't block the line." The passenger next to them took half a step back. The teenager adjusted his camera angle lower. The man in the suit stepped diagonally to the left to get a clearer view of the counter. Ava Bennett stood up straight, holding the boarding pass in her left hand. The passport was still in Chloe Parker's hand. The scanner still hadn't touched the document. "I need to get on this flight." Chloe Parker glanced down at the boarding pass, then back at the crossbody bag. Her finger tapped twice on the counter. But she didn't enter any data. Janet Cole walked by, behind the cluster of counters, slowing for a beat when she saw the raised phones, then kept walking. The work phone in Ava Bennett's pocket buzzed once. A short vibration. Chloe Parker heard it, but asked nothing. She bent down to a low cabinet inside the counter, then stood up with a small white box of matches in her hand. Ava Bennett placed the boarding pass she had picked up back on the counter and said, "I need you to scan my passport." Chloe Parker opened the matchbox and then placed Ava Bennett's passport on the rim of the metal trash can next to the counter. Chloe Parker held the passport with the corner of the tissue, one hand resting it on the rim of the metal trash can, the other pulling a single match from the small white box. Ava Bennett remained in front of the counter, her left hand holding the boarding pass, her right hand down by her bag. The blonde teenager behind them raised his phone higher. The man in the suit held his phone at chest level. The electronic display above the counter ticked down from 38 to 37 minutes. "I need you to scan my passport." Chloe Parker struck the match against the side of the box. A flame flared up on the first try. She touched the flame to the bottom corner of the passport cover. The edge darkened first. Then the plastic laminate curled. The embossed letters on the cover changed color. A thin wisp of smoke drifted straight up toward the sensor near the ceiling. Ava Bennett didn't step forward. She didn't reach across the counter. She just stared at the passport resting on the trash can. This is just how we handle fake documents. A maintenance worker pushing a floor cleaning cart stopped to the left of the counter. He lifted a small fire extinguisher off his cart. Chloe Parker turned her head and shooed him away with a flick of the wrist holding the matchbox. The maintenance worker stopped 2 steps from the counter. The fire ate deeper into the corner of the passport. A piece of the cover curled up. The page inside opened slightly. A yellow streak from the seal on the cover dripped down into the bottom of the metal trash can. Ava Bennett placed her boarding pass on the counter again. The paper still had the gray smudge on the corner. The phone in her pocket buzzed. Longer this time. The screen lit up through the outer fabric. Chloe Parker glanced down at it. Then used the tip of a ballpoint pen to push the burning part of the passport deeper into the trash can. The blonde teenager took half a step to his right to get a clear shot of the hand holding the pen. The man in the suit raised his phone to eye level. "You just destroyed a federal document." Chloe Parker leaned her hip against the side of the counter. The matchbox was still open in her hand. She looked over Ava Bennett's shoulder at the line of people waiting, then back at the trash can. An older woman near the signpost nodded slightly, as if she'd understood the situation from the start. A little boy standing next to her tugged on his mother's sleeve and looked up at the counter. "Mummy, why is that lady burning her passport?" The phone in Ava Bennett's pocket vibrated again. A different notification this time. Shorter and higher pitched. Janet Cole returned from the end of the counter cluster and walked straight toward gate B12. She looked at the trash can first. Then the matchbox in Chloe Parker's hand. Then the phones being held up from 3 different angles. The smoke was still rising in a thin trail. A passenger from the line on the left stepped back to avoid the smoke. The boarding gate display ticked down to 36 minutes. Janet Cole stopped next to the counter. Chloe Parker pointed at the trash can with her pen. Ava Bennett kept both hands in sight, standing exactly 1 foot from the edge of the counter. Janet Cole didn't ask if the scanner had been used. She didn't look at the document verification screen. She bent down, looked at the half-burned cover, then stood up straight again. "We're going to have to hold you for questioning." Ava Bennett didn't move from her spot. She pulled the strap of her bag back up from her elbow. The boarding pass lay flat on the counter. The small priority stamp in the corner was still visible. The sound of a security radio crackled from the hallway to the left. Officer Grant Ellis walked quickly from the direction the maintenance worker had just moved from. He looked at the crowd first, then at the smoking trash can, then at Ava Bennett, who was standing alone in front of the counter. "What's going on here?" Janet Cole tilted her head toward Ava Bennett. Chloe Parker set the matchbox down next to the scanner. Officer Grant Ellis glanced down into the trash can for another second. Inside was the half-burned passport cover, a shrunken piece of the photo, and a few black flakes stuck to the metal bottom. Ava Bennett spoke just loud enough for those at the counter to hear. "I can be verified through the system. No one touched the scanner. No one touched the keyboard." Officer Grant Ellis stood diagonally to the right, creating a barrier between Ava Bennett and the jet bridge entrance. Janet Cole kept her eyes on the crossbody bag. Chloe Parker used the tip of her pen to flick some ash off the rim of the trash can. The strap of Ava Bennett's bag had slipped completely to one side. revealing a small chain attached to the inside seam. Officer Grant Ellis's eyes fixed on that chain as Janet Cole held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stay put. Officer Grant Ellis looked down at the small chain visible at the edge of the bag and held his position. Janet Cole reached across the counter, signaling for Ava Bennett not to move forward. Chloe Parker stood close to the scanner, the matchbox to the right of her hand, the ballpoint pen still resting on the rim of the trash can. Smoke from the half-burned passport continued to rise in a thin wisp. The display above the counter showed 35 minutes remaining. 3 phones were now recording from 3 different angles. The maintenance worker stood off to the left, not leaving his floor cart. "I have federal identification in my bag." Officer Grant Ellis glanced at Janet Cole before looking back at Ava Bennett. No one touched the scanner. No one opened the verification system. Ava Bennett pulled the strap of her bag up onto her shoulder, then unzipped the outer pocket with one hand. She took out a black leather wallet, placed it on the counter right next to the smudged boarding pass. Chloe Parker didn't touch the wallet. Janet Cole leaned in first. Officer Grant Ellis took half a step closer. Ava Bennett opened the wallet. A gold badge gleamed under the counter lights. Below, it was an agency ID card with a photo, full name, and the title line of the Federal Aviation Administration. A tri-folded letter of authorization sat behind a clear plastic window. Janet Cole's eyes lingered there for an extra beat. Officer Grant Ellis looked from the badge to the ashes in the trash can. Chloe Parker took half a step back from the scanner, then froze her. "Secure the scene." Ava Bennett pulled her work phone from the outer pocket. The screen showed multiple missed calls from a federal number. She dialed it back right there at the counter, her eyes still on the metal trash can. Her voice was short, even, just loud enough for the counter to hear the gate number, time, evidence, and the number of people recording. Officer Grant Ellis turned to the left corridor, calling for another security officer to clear a space around the counter. Janet Cole pulled a retractable belt barrier from a nearby post to block off the waiting passengers. Daniel Brooks came hurrying from the other end of the counter cluster when he heard the federal agency's name mentioned in the call. "Lock this counter down." Daniel Brooks stopped in front of the trash can, looking at the half-burned cover, the shrunken piece of photo, and the golden seal that had melted to the metal bottom. He then looked at the matchbox lying next to the scanner. Chloe Parker was no longer standing behind her post. Janet Cole placed the matchbox into a clear plastic bag from a drawer under the counter. Officer Grant Ellis instructed the people recording to preserve the original files and not to leave the area for a few minutes. The blonde teenager nodded. The man in the suit lowered his phone, then opened the screen again to show the recording time. 8 minutes later, a federal team arrived to take over the scene, collecting the metal trash can, the ashes, passenger videos, and a copy of the gate log for that morning. Ava Bennett finished her first call and made another. This time, she gave the names: Chloe Parker, Janet Cole, Daniel Brooks, Gate B12, and the time of the incident at the counter. No one interrupted. The overhead display clicked to 33 minutes. Another officer brought over an evidence bag. The ash around the rim of the trash can was left untouched. The partially burned piece of cardboard was photographed right where it was before being picked up. Officer Grant Ellis stood off to the right, keeping a clear path between the counter and the jetway entrance. "You're not working this counter anymore," Daniel Brooks told Chloe Parker as he pulled up the shift assignment screen. Her gate access code was grayed out on the monitor. Janet Cole stepped away from her supervisory position at the counter and stood behind the stanchion ropes. Ava Bennett put her badge wallet back in her pocket, but left the warrant on the counter for a few more moments for the record photos. A team from corporate arrived before the gate closed. Someone from legal stood there, quickly reading off the timestamps from a passenger's video. Within 72 hours, the airline submitted a plan to review document check procedures at all active gates, reopen old complaints related to excessive document scrutiny, and add a new compliance supervisor position right at this airport. In a later filing, the airline also agreed to years of monitoring, increased spending on counterside controls, and added a new layer of review at high-traffic boarding points. 3 months later, a consent decree was entered into the court record. Chloe Parker's name was no longer on the airline's schedule. Janet Cole was moved from her gate position. Daniel Brooks transferred to the compliance department, and Ava Bennett was put in charge of the new review team for the entire domestic network. Stemming from the incident at Gate B12, the airline installed additional counter-facing cameras, changed the procedure for holding questionable documents, and required all agents to verify the system before touching any of a passenger's property. Later, the record from Gate B12 was even incorporated into an industry-wide update on regulations for document checks and handling suspicious situations at the gate. To me, this wasn't about the big speeches. It was about one hand on a passport, one match, and one scanner that nobody bothered to use. What moment do you think was the real turning point? Share your thoughts in the comments. Send this story to someone else. And subscribe to Power Misplaced Stories.